An Xtra.
Good evening, I'm Saul Sainz, and this is ABC 7 Extra Sunday Edition. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening with us. Next month, you and the rest of El Pasoans living within the city limits will get the opportunity to decide on several propositions on the ballot on May 6th. But the one getting the most attention, certainly on the airwaves, online ads, billboards, and even on some mobile billboards, is Proposition K, also known as the Climate Charter. The measure would put in place several new policies into the El Paso City Charter aimed at having the city reduce pollution in the region and shift the city to greater reliance on clean energy sources like solar, a greener carbon imprint. But the charter also has other policies with wide-ranging effects that could impact your budget. One side, those against Proposition K, say it would hurt the city's economy, impacting businesses. Most vocal against Prop K has been the El Paso Chamber, the Chamber of Commerce, with a political action committee called El Pasoans for Prosperity. Now, an emailer is paid for the Consumer Energy Alliance that we have. And the opposite side, the local group who wants you to vote yes on Prop K is Sunrise El Paso, affiliated with Ground Game Texas, the Austin-based advocacy group. Both groups are part of a nationwide organization battling climate change and urging support of the Green New Deal. Now, if the Green New Deal sounds familiar, that's because it's headed up by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But don't think both sides are purely grassroots. Both have ties to groups from out of state, groups that have chosen El Paso as the battleground for and against climate change measures. Now, Proposition K is causing a lot of controversy with supporters, saying it's the climate action the city needs now. Opponents, though, see it as a job killer. It's going to cost taxpayers way too much money. Leila Lopez-Itziro provides an explanation for ABC 7 Extra Sunday Edition.
10 propositions on the ballot are each a sentence long. Proposition K takes up more than half a page. El Pasoans we spoke with either hadn't heard about it or didn't understand it.
I haven't heard much about it, actually.
I know it's something to do with green energy.
I've seen an event where they talk about it, but they confuse me even more.
Sunrise El Paso, the group that got enough signatures to put the measure on the ballot, and the Chamber of Commerce read the same words very differently.
While it's an overall well-meaning goal, the plan itself is so incredibly poorly written that I think that's why there's a lot of controversy about what exactly it says.
It is written in a way that is set up for a foundational sort of interpretation, and it's more of a framework. It's not meant to answer every question, just similar to like the Constitution, right? These are our goals, these are foundational principles that we are then going to be able to further amend, add changes, revisions, things like that.
Sunrise El Paso says it'll bring growth.
A real important part of our Proposition K is creating climate jobs, and not just creating new jobs for new people to apply to, but transitioning these workers to become not only experts in the oil field now, but experts in solar energy implementation.
The Chamber CEO says it'll be an economic disaster.
We're looking at the possibility of losing 170,000 jobs, overall shrinkage of 40% to our economy, and a lot of that comes from the municipalization of El Paso Electric, a company which I should add is not for sale right now. That alone could cost us in excess of $9 billion.
If passed, Proposition K would, quote, require the city of El Paso to employ all available efforts to convert El Paso Electric to municipal ownership. Andrea Hutchins says that would compel the city to buy El Paso Electric. Dominic Chacon disagrees.
Well, I want to push back a little bit on the word buy or purchase, you know, because that's the narrative that they want us to sort of take on, right? That El Paso, the city of El Paso is going to have to buy or purchase El Paso Electric. That is not the definition of municipalize. Municipalization refers to a broad set of tools that the city has to deflate the value or inflate the value of certain assets. And so, and similar to what they did in Duranguito, a historical neighborhood near downtown El Paso, where they deflated the cost of historical buildings, devalued it so that other people can come up and buy it, and then they can use it for private interests. Now we're asking them to use those tools in favor of the public interest.
We commissioned a 60-page report so that voters would have the opportunity to really know the full cost of the charter itself.
The city hired an independent company that did not include the purchase of El Paso Electric, but it did put a price tag.
The city numbers showed that it was going to cost in excess of $155 million.
Why did Sunrise not pursue a study looking at the economic impact on families?
Well, there are plenty of studies out there that already exist, specifically as it relates to Texas and the potential for solar energy. But the reason why we did that is because it's not a requirement.
As election day draws near,
I want to encourage people to just read the document. I know it's dense, I know it's hard, but I used to tutor 5th grade science, and I teach them, get your pen, underline the important words, circle the definitions, because simply reading the climate charter really helps to clear out all that, mudding of the water and all that misinformation.
I want voters, first of all, to be educated. So they are more than welcome to go to elpaso.org/advocacy. They can read the full charter there. They can also read the report that the chamber put together.
A lot to weigh for El Paso voters. Lelo Basitsiro, ABC7.
Well, tonight we want to provide the most accurate information about what Proposition K would mean to our city and to fact check any claims made on both sides. Joining me to talk about the Climate Charter Amendment is El Paso Chamber CEO Andrea Hutchins. One of the biggest opponents of Proposition K is El Paso Electric. Now, I did reach out to El Paso Electric, and a spokesperson tells me they prefer to have the El Paso Chamber represent the voice of opposition to Prop K. Sitting next to Ms. Hutchins is Miguel Escoto, representing Sunrise El Paso, a local group credited with raising the necessary signatures to put the proposition on the ballot. My very first question for both of you: groups from outside of El Paso are pumping thousands of dollars into campaigns for and against Proposition K. Ms. Hutchins, what groups outside of El Paso are funding your efforts here in the borderland?
So the majority of the folks that are funding the El Paso Chamber's efforts are local. We have received some funding for the PAC, El Pasoans Prosperity, as you referenced earlier, that are representing associations that represent local businesses. As you mentioned earlier in the report, this initiative is really a national initiative, and I think folks from these various associations are going to the Sunrise website and seeing that El Paso is kind of the ground game for this initiative, and they're quite frankly frightened. So one of the things that they have been doing is watching this campaign relatively closely and providing support to the chamber so that they can make sure that their business representation here in the community is also protected.
Okay, Mr. Escoto, what organizations are funding your effort from outside the borderland?
Right, so thank you, Sol, for having us. There's a big difference between the two sides here. On our side, the proponents of the Climate Charter, we are funded primarily and overwhelmingly by small dollar donations. And some chunk of funding that we did get was actually from a legal fight against El Paso Electric. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Why was it that a community group, Chaparral, this was the Chaparral Community Coalition for Health and Environment. They live a few miles from the Newman gas plant that El Paso Electric operates and profits from, right? They have lived under the reign of this pollution for so long. A lot of the community members that we spoke to there are suffering from respiratory illnesses, and a lot of them don't have insurance. They're very suffering a lot.
We're gonna get to that in a second, but first of all, what are the organizations that are outside of the borderland that are funding Sunrise El Paso? We talked about Ground Game Texas. What other organizations? Is the Green Deal also funding your effort?
No, so we do have some support from Sunrise movement nationally.
Okay.
But the vast majority of this action, this activity, is local organizations, and I do want to go back to that story.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Right.
And we will get back to talking about that. But for now, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the ad campaigns you've been watching or reading concerning Proposition K. You're watching ABC7 Xtra, where news comes first.
Busy highways can be dangerous. Traffic is dense and big semis rule the road.
Was your loved one wrongfully killed or seriously injured because someone was careless behind the wheel?
Call the Strong Arm Team today. Longcar, Lyon, Jenkins, 800-ALL-7.
At Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso, you simply get more inventory. While other dealers are struggling to get new cars in, we have the best inventory we've had in years with the vehicles you want, like Sonata, Tucson, and Santa Fe. And more savings with 0% APR on many new Hyundais. That's right, 0% is back. And payments as low as $199 a month. That's more inventory and more savings. Not to mention more warranty, more technology, more safety, more convenience, more. But at Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso, more costs less.
Times are tough, inflation is high, interest rates are up, and income tax checks are late. New Deal Furniture feels your pain. We're not all talk, we take action. You need discounts, financing, and in-stock items. Got cash? Take 40% off our regular everyday low prices. No cash? Get discounts in up to 48 months. Zero interest. That's fiscal responsibility without hurting your wallet. Easy discounts and 0% interest on the best selection of in-stock furniture. New Deal for President.
Hamilton in El Paso at the Plaza Theater. Get tickets at elpasolive.com/Hamilton.
Big insurance companies have three objectives.
Deny your claim, delay your settlement, and defend themselves. All to keep more money in their pockets.
Call the law firm you can trust and get the justice you deserve.
Monclar, Lyon, Jenkins, the Strong Arm Team.
Welcome back to ABC7 Extra. I want to show you one of the commercials that have been airing on local stations. Then I want to get the guest reactions.
Is not okay. It's not okay for our community or the people of El Paso. It's not okay for taxpayers that could lose billions in revenue and earnings. It's not okay for hundreds of thousands of El Pasoans that could lose their jobs. And it's not okay that it comes with widespread damage to our economy. Don't let Prop K halt decades of progress. There's a better way. On May 6th, help El Paso continue to thrive by voting no way on Prop K. Let them know Prop K is not okay.
And I also want to welcome back my guest, El Paso Chamber CEO Andrea Hutchins. Sitting next to her is Miguel Escoto, representing Sunrise El Paso. Ms. Hutchins, I want to ask you about that commercial, how accurate it is, how many jobs we'll be taking, is it misleading? And then I also want to ask you about a particular commercial that is airing on other stations that talks about how resources will be taken away from firefighters when they're fighting a fire at a gas station. How accurate is that?
So to answer your first question about the initial commercial from the Consumer Energy Alliance, so we believe that that is incredibly accurate. There are estimates that are showing that the climate charter, if enacted, is going to cost in excess of at least $155 million, according to the city. And by our own estimates, we're looking at the loss of 170,000 jobs by 2035. And we know that, you know, with the potential municipalization of El Paso Electric, that alone could cost taxpayers $9 billion. So when we look at some of the unknowns because of the vague language that's included in the climate charter, I don't think it's an overestimation at all to talk about the overall economic impact being in the billions. And then to get to your other question about some of the other, what was your other question?
Yeah, the other question has to do with a commercial that's airing right now across El Paso that makes a claim that resources will be taken away from firefighters from fighting fires at gas stations. How accurate is that?
So when we look at the overall cost to the city's budget, we know that other funds are going to be taken away from, you know, special programs, and even the climate charter itself requires that additional tax revenue, if received, be sent directly to climate initiatives where appropriate. Now, obviously, folks get to decide at City Council and on this 9-member commission were to be created what is appropriate, but we don't know. Those are all unknowns. So when we look at the overall cost to the city being in excess of $155 million, it's not a stretch to make the assertion that money is going to be taken away from our police and fire, among other services.
It's an assumption, though.
Well, it's an assumption based on what the climate charter says. Because the climate charter is written so incredibly vaguely, one has to make assumptions about what the overall economic impact is going to be, because Sunrise did not provide their own numbers.
Yeah. Mr. Scott, let me get your opinion on what that digital or what that ad says. Your thoughts on what Ms. Hutchins just said about that commercial that we just saw right now.
Right, so both of those commercials are simply lies. Both of those, primarily the one that talks about all of the job loss and all of the loss of the economy, we need a citation for that. And that citation is primarily the economic impact study that the El Paso Chamber of Commerce commissioned by Points Consulting. Now, top academics from the University of Texas and the University of Columbia have read through that study, and they have absolutely debunked all of it. Don't take my word for it, take theirs. These are leading energy experts, and they looked at this forum of fossil fuel disinformation, and they determined it's just false.
Okay.
So as far as the firefighters, that's just ridiculous as well. And voters should be very curious as to why they're trying to distort the charter this way. Very simply, what the charter says is that we should, as a city government, take a proactive initiative role in searching for climate funding. There is climate funding in the federal government right now, over $7 billion from the EPA alone. We already have precedent for this here in the solar panel project in the airport. That was 1.75 million. It happens. Getting climate funding for local city beneficial projects is something that happens. What the climate charter says is we should take a proactive role to do more of it.
Okay, so, to be as balanced as possible, let's go ahead and show our viewers the digital ad that you all have. And you're familiar with the digital ad. Here it is. It says that it's going to create secure thousands of sustainable jobs for El Pasoans, reduce or address the toxic chemicals in our neighborhoods. How accurate is this?
That's just simply what the climate charter does, right? We have lived through so many decades of the city failing to live up to their role, which is to keep polluters accountable. They simply haven't. Mm-hmm. And as far as creating climate jobs, that refers to the mandate for the climate department, mm-hmm. led by the climate director and grounded by the Peoples-Driven Climate Commission, to search and receive federal and state funding for local initiatives, as I just said.
To be as balanced as possible, Ms. Hutchins, let me get your opinion on that one ad that a lot of our people online have been watching. Your thoughts on that ad?
So, Miguel just referenced the fact that the city already has initiatives that are accessing the federal funds that he is referencing that only Prop K can gain access to. And I would just like to remind voters that they voted in November for Proposition C, which is costing taxpayers in excess of $5 million and will do many of the same things that Proposition K is asserting to do. The difference is that Prop K allows for folks from Ground Game Texas to be in more of a leadership role at the city. And I've pushed back on Miguel's assertions on a number of occasions. And generally speaking, when I push back and ask what the difference is between Prop C and Prop K, the answer generally is that it gives them a seat at the table. And if you really dissect that for a second, the way that the charter is written, it would create a climate commission that would be on par with the city manager. And so you have to ask, is Prop K on the ballot to gain additional leadership roles for Sunrise El Paso in our city government, or is it for climate, which already exists in the city? One of the other things that I would just like to point out, Miguel referenced that a number of studies have been done in response to the Chamber's initiative as well. And I want to point out that the Rose study that was just published the day before yesterday, it has references to bobvila.com. So I just want to point that out because anybody can put together a rebuttal, but our 62-page fact-based economic impact analysis is based exactly verbatim on the climate charter's language.
Okay, we're going to take another quick break. And when we come back, we're going to break down how the Proposition K would impact your budget. We'll have that part of this segment and the next segment coming up. We'll be right back.
Your boss thinks you're his best employee. You earn a double burger with tons of melted cheese. Also, you're self-employed. A supersonic double stack cheeseburger.
Mmm, Sonic.
Hey, you two. So, you've been saving for your dream home? Or perhaps saving to build a home of your own? Maybe it's time for a change. Now is a great time to apply for a First Light mortgage and save up to $3,500 on your closing cost. Apply now, and remember, First Light Federal Credit Union. Your better credit union.
These aren't just vehicles or car parts. They're promises
Hey, thank you so much for choosing Viva.
to keep you safe on the road, to get you to and from work or play. No one at the Viva Auto Group ignores a promise, or over-promises, or makes an empty promise. We keep them. A promise is a reason why the Viva Auto Group is a mainstay in El Paso and Las Cruces with 8 dealerships and service departments. Because a promise means everything to us and to you.
I think about my co-workers, my employees who would be devastated by Prop K.
We already pay super high taxes in El Paso.
If it happens, it would devastate our quality of life. We are seriously overtaxed as it is. We know that we're going to pay a lot more.
Proposition K doesn't just affect me, it'll affect our members.
Financial stress affects families.
It's going to affect everything.
No way to Prop K.
No way.
No way.
No way to Prop K.
On the $3 crabs have arrived at Sonic. All you need is a crisp $3 bill, but those don't exist. So we made our own Sonic on the $3 crabs.
Sonic. Welcome back to our third and final segment of ABC 7 Xtra Sunday Edition. I also want to welcome back my guest, El Paso Chamber CEO Andrea Hutchins. Sitting next to her is Miguel Escoto, representing Sunrise El Paso. We also want to show you a graphic that we're going to be bringing up to try to break down exactly what the costs are, or several questions and answers for our viewers that they may have. First, the El Paso Chamber did a commission study. Although Sunrise El Paso did not, you do point to a recent study from 3 experts just released. So you mentioned it briefly a short while ago, but essentially what does that study say, Mr. Escoto?
So I could quote directly here from the study, and half of it was talking about what the chamber study concluded, which was false, simply false. Everything that was concluded from that study came from a false assumption. I'm going to quote from here directly. The chamber study, their stark predictions of economic collapse stem from the assumption that El Paso would lose over 70% of their energy by 2045, which is egregious and displays a fundamental misunderstanding of how energy systems work, particularly in Texas.
Okay, Ms. Hutchins, have you had access to this study?
Yes, absolutely. So, again, I'm going to
So
go
let's
back.
take it point by point. What do you think about what Mr. Escoto just said?
Well, obviously, the chamber does not run electric companies, but I can tell you that El Paso Electric is not able to provide the city with electricity without the access to water. And one of the key things that that the climate charter calls for is the lack of, or the cutoff of, water to fossil fuel industries outside of the city limits. And I can tell you there's absolutely no way that El Paso Electric is able to provide electricity currently without water. So when we talk about assumptions, folks have to make some assumptions on the economic impact analysis, because the climate charter itself does not have a single dollar figure associated with it.
Okay, did you want to continue, Mr. Escoto? Was there another
Absolutely.
point on that?
So of course, the studies are based on assumptions, absolutely. And what these 3 experts have determined is that theirs was incorrect. So you actually can produce electricity and energy without using this billions of gallons of water that we're using right now, which is the case with El Paso Electric. So we can actually transition to renewables, still economically prosper, create, as they call it, a hub for carbon-free renewable energy. And this would be an opportunity for us to lead the country as El Paso. So achieving our renewable energy goals and reaching economic prosperity, they're not mutually exclusive. What is a conflict, what is controversial here, is the interest that Ms. Hutchins represents. El Paso Electric is a J.P. Morgan-owned, privatized, monopolized corporation that extracts wealth from us. They extract wealth, billions, millions each year. So what we're saying is we can do it differently. We don't have to rely on so much fossil fuels. Right now, we're the 10th sunniest city in the world, and we only use 5% renewables.
Ms. Hutchins, fact or fiction, what Mr. Escoto just said?
So, at the end of the day, when we talk about whether or not electricity can be generated without water, it absolutely can, but not without billions of dollars of investment. And that's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen for free. You, as the taxpayer, are going to pay for every single thing that he is referencing.
Okay, let's talk about jobs. Let's talk about jobs so we can move on, because we're running out of time. Is this, as you well know, the El Paso Chamber is saying that this would be a job killer? You want to reiterate that, Ms. Hutchins? Would this be a job killer if Proposition K were to pass?
Absolutely. So we already know that doing business in El Paso is expensive. Property taxes are expensive. Just operationally, the fact that we are geographically isolated can sometimes add to certain costs. When we look at the cost of doing business, we as the chamber need to make sure that the economic climate here in El Paso is just as good as the climate in general. And we have talked to hundreds of businesses who have said that there is absolutely no way that they could comply with the requirements that are in the charter to switch over from from gas to electric overnight. A lot of the things that are required in the charter, folks talk about as goals, but they are written verbatim in the charter. And so when we talk about jobs being able to, stay here in El Paso and grow and expand, the folks who are pro climate charter talk about green jobs. Our study found that when you look at solar jobs, over half of those jobs are temporary. Most of those jobs go away once the solar is installed. And so when we look at the city's Prop C and its ability to create a climate plan for our economy, we believe that the pace and the plan and the overall input from the community will be able to retain jobs.
Okay, Mr. Escoto, is it a job killer?
Absolutely not. It's the opposite. It creates job. It creates our ability to fulfill our potential as the Sun City. As I mentioned, we only use 5% renewable energy right now in our grid, and we are one of the leading potentials in the world for the expansion of this economy, right? As I mentioned, renewable energy, climate justice, and economic prosperity, they're not mutually exclusive. And I can read directly from this quote as well. The experts from this study say, quote, El Paso could position itself with Prop K to be a major hub for carbon-free energy manufacturing and support for industries, as well as play a large role in the global economy as regions look for low-carbon, carbon-neutral goods. So we can expand. We can absolutely prosper. But here's the difference, though. There's a difference between community wealth that stays here and community wealth that's extracted. And that's the status quo right now. And we feel it in our property taxes, absolutely. Because you know who doesn't contribute to the overall tax revenue as much as they should? The electric utility. In other parts of the country, in other parts of this state, the electric grid is public. It's publicly owned. So all of the profits can be redirected back into the community.
Okay.
And right now, that's not the case. El Paso Electric extracts over $144 million of profits. So it creates jobs. Again, don't trust me. Trust these experts.
As we proceed, let's have that graphic put up just a second again so we can get to our next topic. Let's talk about the impact on pollution. We've already talked plenty about the municipalization of El Paso Electric. Let's talk about the impact of pollution, and I'll start with you, Ms. Hutchins. What sort of impact not having Proposition K, if we were to vote down Proposition K, what sort of impact would it have on pollution here in our borderland?
Well, the great thing about not enacting Prop K is that we would allow Prop C to do its job. The city just created a climate department, which is one of the key things that Prop K calls for in November. They just hired a climate department director in February. Nicole Farini is very passionate about making sure that the city moves forward with a cleaner and greener climate here in El Paso. And I can also point out that on March 7th, the EPA told us that the pollution, for the most part, is coming from across the border. Point blank. In 2018, the city of El Paso was found to be a non-attainment city. And since that time, there has been a number of sensors put up in the community, I believe 17 to be exact. And those sensors are measuring where pollution is coming from. And the EPA came out in agreement and said that the majority of the pollution is coming from Juarez. So at the end of the day, when we look at creating a new type of city charter here in El Paso that would be the most extreme climate initiative in the country, it would be the burden of the taxpayers of El Paso to pay for that entire thing, while the things that are happening in Juarez are actually providing the greatest impact on our overall climate.
Mr. Escoto, I'll let you respond to that, the impact on the pollution should Proposition K pass.
So if Prop K passes, we are able to do a lot more than Prop C. What's the current status quo is absolutely not enough. We are the 12th most polluted city in the country when it comes to ozone, and we feel it. We grow up here, we get asthma, we have respiratory problems. This is a huge issue. So there are two major industrial forms of pollution. There's the gas plants that El Paso Electric runs, which pollutes billions of pounds of carbon dioxide and VOCs and harmful cancer and asthma-causing pollution into the atmosphere. The status quo, including with Prop C, they wouldn't push El Paso Electric to do anything. El Paso Electric is currently breaking ground constructing a sixth generator, which costs $163 million ratepayer dollars at the Newman generating station. They're building fossil fuel expansion right now. And so there's a big difference between Proposition C and Proposition K. Proposition K says, we will keep El Paso Electric accountable.
Okay.
They don't listen to us.
All right. Thank you so much. We ran out of time, but I want to thank you, Mr. Escoto and Ms. Hutchins. Thank you so much for sharing all your views and giving us a better insight as to what Proposition K would do. And I want to thank you, our viewer, for watching. We have a link to the entire Proposition K on our website at kvi.com. And remember, the best way to make an informed decision is by researching the proposition for yourself. That way you decide for yourself when you cast your ballot. Thank you for joining us. I'm Saul Saenz, and this has been ABC 7 Extra Sunday Edition. Good night y buenas noches.
Thank you for watching. ABC 7 News is now available on any of these streaming services, as well as the KVIA News and KVIA Weather and Traffic apps.